Welcome, welcome. A few quick announcements before I hand it over. We are videoing today's program. It is recording back there, so if you do get up to get some more delicious tea or one of Sarah's yummy cookies, just be mindful of the camera, please. The summer reading program is really, really close, you guys. The kids this year are building an archaeology set with all of their checkpoints, so by the end of the summer they will have collected all the items and some fossils to dig. There are still a few things on the list that we're hoping can be donated soon, so if you are interested, it's an Amazon wish list. We also have little quarter-page handouts downstairs if you want to take it. But help these kids keep that summer reading going and build an archaeology kit at the same time. Tomorrow, we have our final Two Peaks, One Book program. Eden Welker is going to be here and talk about the hearth findings from the museum. It is tomorrow at 2 o'clock up here, and then that will round out our Two Peaks, One Book, Unearth a Story, also archaeology theme, if you're noticing a pattern. And then next Thursday is our final program for our regular adult programming season. Jared Fleming, State Forester, is going to be here and talk about the beetle infestation we're looking at and what this season is going to look like as far as fire danger and things like that. So extremely important information if you can come. We will be filming that though as well to put on our YouTube channel. One of our favorite presenters is back. We always love having Randi, not only a great book storyteller, obviously, but great storyteller in person, so entertaining and informative. We are selling copies of the books. You will check out with Mark at the end. You'll just grab whatever you want and he will check you out. So the sales are going through the Book Nook, so they are still benefiting the Friends of the Library. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. I think I know at least half of you, so thank you for having me back. It's nice to see everybody. I was really pleased to see an invitation from Levita in my email inbox saying, "Do you want to come talk?" And it's like, of course I want to come talk. And they're like, "What do you want to talk about?" And I'm like, today I want to talk about the Western Horse. This is my first book that's gone national, so it was in True West Magazine, Cowgirl Magazine, Big Sky Journal, Western Living, and some other stuff. Because the reason why Sandy Hackbarth was the director at the time, but she was the first person who let me do anything with my first book. She's like, "Yes, you can come down to Levita and try it." So I did The Beaten Territory, which became Market Street Madam. And so I have a very soft spot in my heart for all of you guys. So thank you for having me. This is a picture coming from Craig, Colorado. It's really Lake, Colorado. This is the Wild Horse Refuge that has been established to the northwest of there. Yes, I bought them a little bit of land. I got a bonus from work, so I just had to do that. Just because, to me, it's really important. The Sandwash Basin, everybody knows that story, a roundup's going to happen, but a lot of those horses do end up at this horse rescue, so that is...
the ones that don't have the slaughter.
Well, yeah, they try to, get them out, but I don't know how that all is going to go. I do know that Mustang people are a unique breed, and they're very passionate. So, let me see how I'm going to do this. This is going. Let's see. Okay, so, did you know that Butch Cassidy was arrested and thrown in the Wyoming Territorial Prison for the theft of a $5 horse? That is what got him in trouble. Not everything, so hold that thought. Okay. Horses were reintroduced to North America, in my opinion, and today's wild horses are not necessarily descendants of the conquistadors' horses. That is what I thought growing up. They're not precisely from them directly. Conquistadors, by and large, only rode stallions. Okay, so you do the female horse together, like, offspring. The Spanish established horse rancherias, first in the West Indies, and then they migrated into Mexico. the Spanish colonists rode horses on their expeditions into the American South and Southwest. So upon settling the territory of Nuevo Mexico, just to the south, the Spanish, as we all know, clashed with the Acoma Pueblo in 1599 and pressed some of the Acoma and others into slavery and peon status. So when these poor unfortunate people were pressed into slavery or peon status, they started becoming familiar with the horse, taking care of them, what you need to do to feed them, how you handle them. In 1680, Pope's revolt came, or the Pueblo revolt, and the Spanish were driven out of New Mexico. By this time, a lot of the Spaniards in the American Southwest had community, probably like La Vida or this all type of thing, where they had community grazing lands, they had like their own communal farming system. So if you don't watch a horse carefully or a group of horses carefully, and if nobody's in charge, they will wander off, right? So a lot of them probably did escape for one reason or another, and then when the Spaniards ended up leaving, they left a lot of their horses behind, which all of a sudden came into the people's hands who were remaining, right? So the Mounted Plains tribes, to me, is really fascinating, and this is just a whole topic in itself. The first tribes to cultivate a horse culture were the Navajo, the Ute, who shared with their kinsmen the Comanche, and the Apache, although the order of acquisition is debatable. One thing I do want to say is there are now native tribes, especially the Comanche, who are saying that they had horses before the conquistadors came into North America. So this is kind of emerging scholarship. I'm interested in it, I'm really interested in it. It's just kind of working its way through what the theories are and all of that. So I don't know, so I'm just kind of taking the standard way of doing it. The Comanche traded the horse with the Shoshone, and by 1700 the horse could already be found in the Pacific Northwest, where trading links then sent them eastward, like across Montana and into the Dakotas, into the northern plains. According to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., in the early 1800s, on native trade routes, the going rate for horses where one ordinary riding horse was equal to 8 buffalo robes, one fine racing horse, and a lot of these tribes had a very strong horse racing culture, was worth about 10 guns. One fine hunting horse was worth several pack animals, which might have been dogs, I'm not sure. 1 gun and 100 loads of ammunition, or 3 pounds of tobacco, or 15 eagle feathers, or 10 weasel skins, or 5 teepee poles, or 1 buffalo hide teepee cover, or 1 skin shirt and leggings decorated with human hair and quills was also the price for a particularly fine horse. And here's a picture from Catlin, circa about 1844. To me, they look like Osage here just because of how their headdress is. But this is called Catching a Wild Horse in 1844. This is a fine book that I really like. It's by a man named Gawani Pony Boy, and he just really goes by Pony Boy. But apparently, he dresses up in native costume and he paints his horses, and I just love to see Native American or indigenous horse painting and what it means. So painted circles around the eye, to them meant better vision for the horse. Upside down horseshoes indicated the number of raids ridden. Handprints meant the number of enemies killed. Stacked lines, like he's got on his haunches, mean the number of coups counted. So this is just a beautiful book if you want to just like look at pictures. So then the cavalry comes. So this is kind of like, I guess, the movement of the horse into the West. This is from the Colorado Historical Society of Fort Crawford after the Meeker Massacre. This was known as the first cantonment in the Compadre. So the origins of the U.S. cavalry came as a response to Black Hawk's War. They had only mounted volunteers if they were even lucky, so these were farmers back east. There was an uneven quality of soldiers, and they usually left their better horses at home, which entirely makes sense to me. Congress approved funding in 1832 for the defense of the frontier, and in 1833, President Jackson signed a bill creating the first regiment of dragoons. And this is a governmental equine and remount business, and this lasted until 1944, which is just wild to me that something was that long lived. 1834 marks the first military exploration into the West, into present-day Muskogee County, Oklahoma, which was then called the Arkansas Territory. This expedition was led by General Leavenworth, we all know that name, and he died from a mysterious illness. So Catlin, who painted that painting back there, was actually part of this 500-man mounted expedition, and a sickness hit both the horses and the people. And it killed about half of them. And they didn't know what it was, we still don't know what it was. Catlin rode what they were terming a Comanche pony, which we would say is a Mustang at this point pretty much, who suffered no ill effects. So this is really important. So the cavalry had the Eastern Thoroughbreds, they came over from England, or they crossed with draft horses or whatever they had. They had to eat oats, and they weren't as well suited to conditions out here. So Kearny's exploration of the Western Plains, they traced along what would become the Oregon Trail through what is now Nebraska, up to South Pass, Wyoming, down to Bent's Fort in Colorado. 99 days, and they covered 2,200 miles, which is just astounding. In 1846, the Mexican-American War broke out. They only had 459 horses furnished for this war. And at this point, horses were basically like, a war machine of the time. These horses were apparently not entirely saddle broke, meaning cost was a governmental overriding concern, same as then as it is today. Ulysses S. Grant took part in this war, during which he rode of the vast herds of wild horses that he saw, so vast that he claimed he doubted that they could be all corralled in the state of Rhode Island or Delaware at one time. So already at this point, there's just vast herds of wild horses. Cavalry guidelines for horses, the cost per head could not exceed $125, which is about $5,000 today. Horses were to be between 5 and 9 years old, weigh between 900 and 1,050 pounds, which for us is kind of lightweight these days. Have good withers, thoroughbreds preferred, who they ate oats, so that is a problem. The need to use Indian ponies came into play, which is the same thing as a Comanche pony or Comanche horse, and the heights and weights requirements were dropped. These mixed blood horses performed very well and were well suited to Western conditions. Strange fact, there was no widespread use of veterinarians until 1879, although Custer's 7th Cavalry actually had one. There was also the popular practice of gouging the government, and many of the horses were inferior. Also, government horses were targeted by thieves because of their brand, so they'd have like US on it or whatever. People loved to steal those, so they just kind of loved to steal from the government. They didn't feel it was at the same level as stealing from your neighbor or the ranch next door, so I just kind of found that good humor. During the Civil War, it was discovered that many troops had a woeful lack of knowledge in the care and treatment of horses and mules. Special inspectors were appointed on the Army staffs and given broad powers, which included the transfer of officers or an entire cavalry command to the infantry, meaning all of a sudden they could be foot soldiers if they were found guilty of mistreating their horses. 1863, the Cavalry Bureau was created to combat accusations of fraud and corruption. So under a man named Major General James Harrison Wilson, he was very good with money, the widespread graft was halted. Horse dealers were now jailed for passing off unhealthy horses to the government. In 1864, after the Civil War, no surprise, there was a huge surplus of horses. 104,000 heads were considered condemned, meaning they didn't want them anymore, and were auctioned off. Only about 4,000 of those horses were retained by the Army and Cavalry, and many complaints came in about the quality of the mounts. Surprising fact, not all cavalry soldiers proved to be adequate riders. I never knew that, at least in the beginning of their commissions. Officers complained about the men who were complaining about their horses. So if you're a horse person, you kind of know when somebody's complaining about the horse, the rider's not coming out scot-free usually. But one discouraged officer claimed he would welcome company officers who were just good riders, no other qualification needed. And that's for the cavalry. I was like shocked, because I thought everybody knew how to ride horses. Here is a picture of the time called The Pursuit. And this, I presume, is a Pony Express rider being chased by Indians over here. There's skulls of buffaloes. Here's an Indian burial platform and a skull fell off. So this is painting a very dark picture of what happened in the Pony Express.
When did the Pony Express start?
I think, didn't it start 1859?
Wow.
And it only lasted for 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yep, it was very short, and it was very bankrupt when it did. Bob, do you agree with my dates?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Bob is my corrector. He's very good. So, wanted 200 gray mares from 4 to 7 years old, not to exceed 15 hands, which is pretty big. Well broke to the saddle and wore to its sound. With black hooves, people thought if your horse had white hooves, it was softer. I don't think it is, but I had very serious horse people tell me always that it's microscopically softer than just a pure black hoof. And they needed to be suitable for riding the Overland Pony, spelled with an EY, Express. The pony was the stuff of American legend even at the time. The odd thing remains that so many notions that pass as facts with the Pony Express simply cannot be proven. The Pony Express, which had the formal name of the Leavenworth and Pikes Peak Express Company, nice plug for us, ran from April 3rd, 1860, here we go, to October 24th, 1861. This is one of the very few certainties about the whole enterprise. As far as horses were concerned, there was approximately about 153 stations, we're not 100% sure, along the route, and it required about 400 to 500 good and dependable horses and about 80 riders to make this work. Many of the horses came from the U.S. Cavalry. Reportedly, and I saw this in the newspaper, Captain McKissick at Leavenworth sold horses, according to the Missouri Democrat newspaper, preferring, I think they're talking about the remount service, but one has to ask if the cavalry was complaining about their mounts and why they are so bad, why he was reportedly selling good horses to civilian contractors, but we don't have an answer for that.
Wow.
We don't have an answer for a lot with the Pony Express. Later accounts disputed the quality of horses that the Pony actually acquired. They were the worst imps of Satan in the business. The only way I could master them was to throw them and to have a man at the head and another at the body as I trimmed the hooves and nailed on the shoes. They would squeal and bite all the time I was working with them. It generally took half a day to shoe one of them, but travel, they never seemed to get tired. So that's coming from Captain Levi Hensel of Pueblo in 1908. Others claimed we used to say the company bought every mean, bucking, kicking horse that could be found. Regardless, each rider covered about 75 to 100 miles per shift, probably changed horses 5 to 8 times per shift. They didn't ride at a gallop, so this idea of just galloping endlessly just doesn't work, right? But they probably traveled at 10 to 15 miles an hour at an easy canter. It's a good clip. Their recollections varied as to their wages paid, ranging from 40 to 100 per month, with the average being about 50. So when they started interviewing like these people, there were a lot of people who claimed to be Pony Express riders that never were. So I mean, some of this is like adding to the uncertainty of what we think we know. Of the 153 stations, there were home and swing stations. Home stations had a station master and 5 or 6 boys or men to help, so these were your larger ones. Swing stations were usually managed by a single man. The Pony had 5 operating districts. The eastern portion covered St. Joseph, Missouri to Fort Kearney. Fort Kearney went to Fort Laramie, onwards from Fort Laramie to Salt Lake City, then on to Roberts Creek, Nevada. And the final western leg went from Roberts Creek, Nevada into Sacramento. The eastern stations, like St. Joseph, had much blooded American stock, so we're back to the purebreds. while Western stations, once again, now work with what they're calling California ponies. So California ponies, Comanche ponies, Indian ponies, I think we're talking Mustangs. So deaths of the rider. So when you look at this picture back here, death seemed kind of a certainty, like based on this picture, right? Well, actually, the first came 15 days after the inaugural run. An ox was laying in the road, and I guess the guy just rode over it and got thrown. They never recorded this gentleman's name. So, poor guy, he's dead. 4 riders killed in fights with American Indians. One named William Carr was hanged for murder after he got drunk and killed a man, and 2 froze to death for a known total of 8 deaths. So it wasn't as hazardous as you would think. But getting drunk in murder was really against the Pony Express's creed. And when these riders would go, each had like a little Bible and stuff because they thought their men were going to, you know, be really good and moral. So then, when I started writing the book, I started thinking about what I think a long ride is and what we hear in legend, right? So Paul Revere's ride only turned out to be 12.5 miles. That's it, 12.5. Anybody can do that, right? So we were all like, Paul Revere, you know, all this sort of stuff. So I guess maybe it was the message he had that was so important, but I was like, oh. But anyhow, Robert Haslam was called Pony Bob, reportedly had the record for the longest ride at either 140 to 160 miles due to the outbreak of the Pyramid Lake hostilities or the Paiute War in 1860. So he put poor Paul Revere totally to shame. He was assigned to something called Friday Station near Lake Tahoe. His standard route ran from Fridays to Fort Churchill, which is near Silver Springs, Nevada, which is about 56 miles, so it's doable, still long. May 1860, Haslam rode to from Fridays to Carson City, expecting to change his horses, but all the horses had been requisitioned from the state militia to combat the Indian uprising. So he rested his mount, then he kept on going. He rode to Buckland Station, where the rider who was supposed to relieve him announced he wasn't going to risk his life for the U.S. mail. He decided he just wasn't doing that. So Pony Bob, the station master, offered him $50 to keep on riding. So $50 was a lot of money then. So he rode to Cold Springs and on to Smith Station, where he slept for a few hours. He took the mochila, which is the envelope where they carried the letters. From the eastbound rider, he probably rode about 140 plus from his initial station. Returning back, he returned to Cold Springs, where the station master lay dead because the hostilities had come through. Then he rode to Sand Creek Station, where the station master abandoned the post and rode with Bob because he didn't want to stick around to find out what was going to happen next. On May 13, 1860, they made it to the Carson Sink. Bob continued alone to Buckland, Silver Spring, back to Carson City, and back to Fridays. Now that is a race, or a ride. So one thing I didn't know in doing this is when the cavalry started out in the West, their job was also to maintain the telegraph poles. I never knew that. So these are like cavalry guys maintaining telegraph poles, and this is like the last, presumably, Pony Express rider kind of saying goodbye and hello, here's the future. Lawless elements. This is a cowboy reenactment. You'll see lots of photographs like this around. They thought it was fun to like pretend they were rustlers and like have their picture taken doing stuff like this. I don't know if they sold them to the tourists or this is what they showed their grandkids or whatever they're doing, but it's kind of cool. So terms for horse thieves and range criminals: rustlers, prairie pirates, range riders, Dutch Henrys, which is also a term used for stolen horses, cattle Kate. I mean, not all these women's names were Kate. So cattle Kate, night rider, brand artist, mavericker. So why was horse theft considered as serious as murder? Thinking back to Butch Cassidy. Anybody know? Do you know? You look like you know.
You could die, you were left afoot.
Exactly. So, let's see, if you were like in Sweetwater, Wyoming, if you were in Levita, Colorado, if you were like somewhere in Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and somebody stole your horse, where are you? If you don't know, and you don't know where water is, and you don't know where to get help, you will die. Chances are good. So that's why. So So that's that one. Early Western law enforcement attempts, the Uplift Society's motto was, "It is essential to forgive all horse thieves, and they can best be forgiven after they have been hanged." Anti-Horse Theft Association, by 1916, there were chapters in Missouri, Nebraska, Arkansas, Illinois, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Texas, Iowa, and Kansas. And the Stock Growers Association had a lot to do with the early attempts. Early law, vigilante and otherwise, we had Dave Cook in Colorado, City Marshal of Denver, and he was the founder of the Rocky Mountain Detective Agency. Granville Stewart, the man below, dealt with he was the star of Montana's Horses Before. Types of theft, outright theft. Apparently government and, quote, Indian horses didn't count to the white guys who were stealing tribal horses. Mavericking, which is branding unbranded horses as one's own. Venting, changing the brand. Stealing horses in one territory and selling them in the next, and vice versa, was this whole racket that was just really wild out here. Brand inspectors, this is a pretty modern brand book. Little has changed today from Dave Cook's time back in the 1860s. Today, brand inspectors still inspect brands. They inspect every animal for a brand upon purchase or sale and transport over 75 miles and crossing state lines. And they are serious. They want you to get your horses inspected. Here's a cowboy mount, just a picture from the Library of Congress. So famous horse thieves in association. Dutch Henry Bourne, so he's the one with the Dutch Henrys. He was very active in the Texas Panhandle and this area of Colorado. Trinidad was a favorite hangout. He died in Pagosa Springs of not being shot or hung, but of pneumonia. The Musgrove Gang, based in Colorado, were publicly hung in Denver. Doc Middleton and the Pony Boys were based in western Nebraska. Doc Middleton died in Wyoming while in jail of erysipelas, a bacterial infection known as St. Anthony's fire. He actually died for running a saloon without a license. So once again, nothing to do with horse theft. Robert Leroy Parker, Butch Cassidy, Wyoming with a history in Colorado. The details of his death are unknown for certain. A lot of people up in the Craig area say, they know him. He came back. He never died in Bolivia. That was like, the story in Hollywood. Flora Mundus, aka Tom King. It was a cross-dressing woman. She died by a gunshot at the hands of her fourth husband in 1903. So, civic leaders implicated with horse thieveries. John Shear, who was Denver City Council in 1860 and the founder of the first library, he was hung. A.C. Ford, Denver attorney, hung. Unnamed officers who resigned of the Stock Grower Association in 1868. This is a picture of Doc Middleton, also known as Jim Cherry, James Shepard, Jack Lyons, and Jim Riley. When he committed crimes, he changed his names a lot. He was called Doc for his ability to doctor brands. From Texas, he evaded the law by moving to North Platte. 1877, he was arrested near Julesburg for stealing 34 horses. He was a little bit incensed when he was arrested, and he said he only stole Cheyenne and Sioux horses, meaning he should be let go. The Pony Boys, which is his gang, he said those were the people who stole from the settlers. It is claimed in a 2-year period that Middleton and his gang stole 2,000 to 3,000 head of horses.
Wow.
Arrest leading to death, operating a saloon without a license in Wyoming. But what they would do is they'd go up into Nebraska, steal a bunch of horses, drive them down into Kansas or drive them into Colorado, sell them off from these other states, steal new horses there, drive them back to Nebraska. It was like this whole revolving washing machine thing. So Flora Mundus is just darn interesting. She was 4'8" tall, weighed 130 pounds. Reportedly was well born in Missouri, near Guthrie. She squandered her inheritance. She married a young man named Ora Mundus, who was only interested in her money. When the money ran out, so did he. It is believed she turned to prostitution, then started dressing in men's clothes to steal horses, and changed her name to Tom King. So if you see newspaper articles, it'll be Tom King is what you'll see more. She's a very talented jailbreaker, which meant she wasn't very good at stealing horses because she got arrested. Okay? She married a Chinese immigrant, changed her name to China Duck. Husband number 3 or number 4, Bill Garland, shot and killed her in 1903 when both were high on opium.
Wow.
So I'm just trying to say that these were not like well-adjusted people. That's like my point here. This is George Ammon's typo. Canyon City, June 28, 1900. This was a vigilante murder and he was a horse thief. This is Beulah, had some horse thief issues, if you know where Beulah is, outside of Pueblo. So back to Butch Cassidy, where we started. Out of all the things, train robberies, bank robberies, you name it, he robbed it. Why did he get busted for a $5 horse? He moved to Telluride in 1884, perhaps to deliver stolen horses from Utah. Cassidy had a ranch in Du Bois, Wyoming. He was arrested in Lander in 1894 and sent to prison for stealing a $5 horse. The theory has been advanced that Butch was running a rancher's protection league up in Du Bois. He served 18 months of a 2-year sentence. His neighbors, who got him arrested, I think, actually wrote letters to the governor of Wyoming, recommended his early release. Why would they do that? We probably assumed that they wanted to do that in order to avoid retaliation when he got set free. The Wyoming governor met with him personally and signed his pardon, convinced that he was going to go straight. He did not go straight. Famous horses and the Little Bighorn. So, how the whole book started was somebody said, well, you know about Comanche Custer's horse, or what did they say? I think they told me it was Custer's horse, which he wasn't, but they're like, you know about Comanche, don't you? No, I did not know about Comanche, so I started ending up reading about Comanche. So this picture here is Custer's horses, Vic and Dandy's, or Dandy and Vic. So Dandy's left was Custer's favorite. He rode Vic into the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Custer, common knowledge, kind of says he was very downcast the night before the battle. He didn't feel he was going to survive, so he rode his second favorite horse in the battle, which makes sense. It is believed that Vic did not survive the battle, but none other than Sitting Bull himself says otherwise. A Canadian superintendent named James N. Walsh of the Mounted Police purchased a horse from the Sioux when they fled into Canada when they were being chased by the army. He believed the horse he purchased to be Custer's Vic. He offered to send the horse back to the 7th Cavalry, an offer that they didn't take up. Walsh renamed the horse Custer. So, why didn't they take him back? Because he would have been direct competition with this horse named Comanche. And Comanche was the rock star of this whole era. Comanche symbolized American strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Yes, it was terrible Custer died. That was a whole big thing. Custer was always controversial. A horse is not controversial. So he was the symbol of everything that, like, anything that we managed to save out of the Little Bighorn came into the realm of Comanche. So then, since Sitting Bull knew about Vic, then I started looking at the Sioux warriors and their take on the battle and horses and all of this type of thing. This is, I love this one. The art is by a man named No Two Horns. This is courtesy of the State Historical Society of North Dakota. He always painted blue horses. Never any other color, they're blue. So, people are like, well, it's a blue roan. I mean, sure. Blue horses. This is also his again. Again, it's a blue horse. This is acoustic, and I just absolutely love this thing. I got to see it in person. I was all happy. It has like a hoof down here, a mane. His Lakota name was He-Nupa-Wanuka, so Joseph No Two Horns. I mean, he loved this horse as much as Custer loved his horses, right? The rest of his life, he painted, he carved, he did art of his blue horse that he rode into battle who did not survive. So, you know, this just kind of like, this makes me like cheer up because it's just like, you know, people are like, oh, you know, Everybody loves their horses. Everybody, if you're a horse person, you've got a favorite horse, that is your horse. You may never recover when that horse moves on. So that, I just wanted to show you the Native American side, just because I just think the artwork is just so fascinating. So early rodeos. Now, I have a beef with Texas, and probably Texas has a beef with me, but they keep saying their rodeos were first, and they were not. So, Deer Trail, Colorado, 1869, thank you very much. North Platte, 1882, William Frederick Cody, Buffalo Bill was the chairman of the 4th of July celebration, a fabulous showman. Pecos Rodeo, Texas, 1883. Denver Festival of Mountains and Plains, if you've ever gone to it, it's now like a food festival. That is not how it started out, so it's just, it was this. Cheyenne Frontier Days, 1897. The Pendleton Roundup, 1910, and the Letter Buck slogan was started there. Women's events. It is believed that barrel racing began in Texas in the early 1900s. And the men would ride them. This is like something that was very surprising to me. It wasn't until the 1940s that barrel racing actually became a speed event as opposed to rather just relying on appearance and horsemanship. 2016, women's ranch riding competitions have reemerged after a hiatus of nearly 100 years. Men can participate in ranch riding competitions as well. The women can use the night latch, which I actually have on my saddle now that I'm older, so you know, it's like a handle, so like if you look like you're going to need to bail and you don't want to become unseated, grab that thing. It's worth the $40 investment, let me tell you what. In the 1910s and 1920s, women rode broncos as much as men did. Women riding side saddle has also made a comeback in special events, including in the Calgary Stampede. Saw YouTube of these women in Victorian costumes, these two sisters. I don't know where they're from, but they are running like hell on fire, all dressed up. I'm like, wow. It was just like, wow. You know, so thank you to a ranch buddy who knew about that from Montana. She's like, you gotta watch this. And I'm like, oh my God. So riding hobbled as opposed to riding slick. So this is what the women used to do. They would ride in the bunking contest. They would have a leather strap underneath the horse's belly to hold the stirrups down. So as you know, if your horse bucks, and if your legs can't just go up, you've got the top of your foot to kind of leverage to hold yourself in the saddle more. So there's pros and cons to this. Falls such as these, this one here is a very famous photograph, turned people away from being in favor of women's events. It was considered too upsetting. They would die, they could break their neck. Bonnie McCarroll actually did die in 1929 after being thrown from a black cat in Pendle, Oregon. This is not the picture of this. This is her being thrown from silver in 1915, and she survived this fall. The the Cowboys Turtles Association, which is the forerunner of the Pro Rodeo, PRCA, formed in 1936, did not allow women's events. So they're called the Turtles because they apparently were slow in making up their mind. Here's just one thing that I found very interesting when doing this work, especially when you're thinking of wild horse herds or bands up in the Sand Wash Basin or wherever you may be, where they have them. How did they get there? Well, during the Boer War and World War I, the British Army wanted American horses. So horse ranchers here would start breeding horses, amassing large numbers of horses. The British Army would come over and they would buy them. These are just some Beulah pictures. Stage line to Beulah. I like looking at horse pictures. Whoops. Anyhow, so they would come and they would buy the horses. And all the ranchers in the district where the purchasers were coming would show all their horses, and then they would ship these poor animals by ship off to South Africa for the Boer War or into the trenches of World War I. It's very horrible. So I don't really dwell on it that much, but anyhow, so when the war ended and they didn't want any more horses, all these horses on ranches, they still needed hay, they still needed care, they just set them free into the American West. And that is when people are going, oh, they're wild horses. Purists will say they're feral horses. you know. But it's really interesting, and that is how we got, like the sand wash basin horses, the horses in Nevada, wherever we have them, the Caracas Mesa horses, which is really interesting. Like some of them, the Caracas Mesa has just such purebred Spanish blood streams that it's just like their DNA is just astounding. So they're trying to protect those herds. They kind of tend to mix with the Jicarilla Apache herds. They have a very high Spanish content. Ours up in northwest Colorado tend to be somewhat of eastern purebreds, but a lot of them are just standard like ranch horses that came off, you know, quarter horse mixes, Mustangs of whatever variety. Yeah, Appaloosas, we're not tended to be sold to the British Army, and they almost went extinct, but now everybody, they're all like rebreeding and stuff like that, the cayuses. So, I mean, it's just kind of interesting to see what all the horses have been through. Just a nice quote from a guy who read this book. He was one of the extras in Gettysburg, and he gets to ride in a McClellan saddle, and I've always wanted to try one of those. But yeah, he loves the book. He just didn't realize, like, you know, what had to happen for us just to have our Western pleasure horses today. It's just amazing. And then here's some more books that I've written. And that's the end of my talk.
Wow.
I don't know if anybody has any questions and if I have any good answers, but I can try.
What do you think about the horses between San Luis and Taos? Are they just,
Well, that could be part of the Caracas Mesa herd. So I don't know exactly where their boundaries are, but I'm kind of getting a little bit involved with them just because I have a friend who's like trying to save the horses. And so it's very interesting. The bloodlines, though, in New Mexico, they have very, very strong Spanish components. So then they're going into the Jeanettes versus the Barbs versus all these different types of horses. And a lot of them, they don't even have those types left in Spain. So it is kind of important to preserve some of the DNA and the living carriers of this. Also what they are finding, you know, they live very well out in the open. They're able to adapt to the harsh conditions. You know, so what the problem is they breed. And then ranchers and other people get upset, you know, when their crops get trampled or, you know, this whole problem happens. So there are people down in New Mexico again who are doing selective birth control, which to me is very interesting. They know, they're not like so much like just random people who are just going out like shooting horses with darts. They recognize the bands and they know which horses they have, well, they know that they've given the birth control to, and then when they want to breed them, they can take them off the birth control, and like 3 years later they will foal. So that's new research. That's one lady who, that's her private job, is she is just trying to manage some of these herds, like in the growth of the herds. And I talked to a rancher who was also a veterinarian a couple weeks ago. You know, and it is tragic, it really is. They're going to do a roundup in the Sand Wash Basin. A lot of ranchers up there they'll die. I mean, there's no water this year, so I can see why it's happening, but they're taking a lot to the Wild Horse Refuge. Where there is water, they pay to bring water in, so it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to think about. I mean, the reason why Mustang cars were named Mustang was a big old advertising ploy that the guy who named it is like, it's as American as hell. And it is. And so I personally want to have wild horse herds or feral horse herds, you know. And I mean, I think they're beautiful animals. You know, there's the Deerwood Sanctuary up in Wyoming where they're taking 3-strike horses, meaning they just don't suit for whatever reason, and they live there till they die, you know. But it's under stress. Everything's under stress that involves money, it seems. Welcome to the world. So, yeah. Yeah.
Were there horses before white man came to the Americas?
So that's what native tribes are saying now. So like the Comanches and some others are saying, you know, the common explanation is the Spaniards reintroduced the horses. Archaeology kind of shows that the horses probably went extinct, But these tribal voices are coming out saying, no, we had horses before the Spaniards came. Now, I don't know if they were bred like in the rancherias in the West Indies and they came through Mexico and they just migrated up and then the Spaniards came later, like 10 years, 20 years later, I don't know. But that is an emerging field of study. It's interesting. I mean, because, you know, to me, it may not be that interesting to everybody, but I think it's really interesting. Like, did they have horses before the Spaniards? It's possible. But now, because they have an oral history as opposed to a written history, it's like, it's back to the prove-it stage. Yeah.
Have you done any comparison with what happened in the East with horses to what's happened in the West?
Not at all. I know that there's wild horses in North Carolina and like Virginia, like in the islands and stuff, but I know nothing about them. I'm going to guess they're thoroughbreds of some variety, but they're probably a Mustang by now too, because horses do wander off, you know, and if they'll breed, so, you know, who knows what you've got. But no, my focus was purely Western.
Weren't mules used a lot in the West?
Yeah. Yeah. So I know very little about mules,
Okay.
but they were used like, you know, in the mines and mining. I just saw pictures of mules, like I was in the mining museum in Walsenburg this morning, and they have their mule pictures. And I mean, I've always heard they're much better for packing, right? So, you know, they did really well in Arizona against the Apache, and that was a very hard campaign, you know, so, but I don't think Apache had mules, I think they had horses. So.
You know, this kind of relates to stuff that you're interested in. My granddad rescued 3 mules from the Allen mine that had worked in the mines and were blind from working underground.
Yeah.
And they were sending them to the glue factory.
Yeah.
And he needed those 3 mules about as bad as nothing at all. And he couldn't even feed himself, but went down and got these blind mules that lived forever and ever in the mines in Trinidad.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, I'm riding like an old lady horse. She's 30 years old. She is 30 years old, which is old for a horse. She is the fastest horse I've ever ridden. I'm like, good Lord. It's like, you know, the owner's like, well, just see if you can kind of control her and make her go slow. It's just like, I'm kind of getting old for this line of just like a hobby. So it's like, you know, I bruise more than I used to, but it's like,
Did you ever do those?
Did I? Only when I was young. I was never that person. And it's like, it's fun, you meet them, like the barrel racers, and I know some ones, and their bodies are beaten up, and they're 30 years old. They're like, I feel like I'm 40, and I'm like, that's really not good. But, you know, it's kind of like the thing. I mean, they're built for speed. They want speed. They get hurt, they get back on. I'll get back on, but I won't be happy about it. So, so yeah. Anything else?
Did you read anything about the average age of a Pony Express rider was? Because I've heard things like 12, 14.
No. No, I think they were probably 16 to about 24. But you know that whole thing like orphans, like that orphan advertisement, that's a lie. They never said like orphans only wanted. That is just a thing of marketing. So I did see some ages, but the weirdest thing about the Pony Express, they don't know who the first riders were. It was covered in newspapers. Nobody ever asked these guys, what is your name? I mean, or who are you? Where are you from? How old are you? They know nothing. So I even wrote to the Pony Express Museum, gosh, I'm thinking it's in St. Joseph, Missouri, asking them questions, going, I'm writing a book, do you have anything on this? Never heard anything from them at all. I'm like, well, it's going to publication, so I'll just do the best I can. But all I really learned, and I read To Hell on a Fast Horse, which is kind of a story, and that guy does a really good job about explaining what we really don't know about the Pony Express. You know, 300 pages of what we don't know. And it still really comes to, yeah, it existed. They went horribly bankrupt. You know, lasted about, 18 months or so. So, you
I
know.
think your picture of the Pony Express guy waiting to the telephone.
Yeah,
telegraph pole, which is really,
it was fun.
Yeah.
It was a fun book to research. So, I mean, I was lucky that the publisher just asked me what I had, like, you know, what do you have? And I'm like, well, nothing. And they're like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I want to write a horse book about, like a book that I would want to read. So it became a labor of love. It was a finalist in the Spur Awards, which is our Olympics for writers. So, yeah, so that's my story about the horses.